So I've just spent the past 3 days away from the community recovering from a virus. And when I was laying in bed, I realized that I could turn the experience of being sick into some really good Dharma practice. And I remember reading a story about how a Dharma student had told his master that he didn't have any time to practice within the past year because he had gotten a very serious illness. And his master scolded him, saying that there's no better time to practice the Dharma than when you're sick. And this is because the body is reminding you at every point that it's impermanent, that it's suffering, and that it's not self, it's falling apart. And so his point was that when we get old or when we get sick, this is actually one of the best times to practice the Dharma. So today I thought I'd share some of the things that I was thinking about while I was recovering. And the first is that suffering forces us to confront some of the distorted ways in which we see reality. And the Buddha referred to these as the 4 distortions. And the 4 distortions are there because of ignorance. And when ignorance is in our mind stream, we tend to not perceive things how they are. So the first distortion that the Buddha talked about is seeing impermanent things as permanent. Or another way of putting this is seeing unreliable and unpredictable things as reliable and predictable, or seeing mortal things as immortal. So when we're sick, it's really clear that our body is not the permanent entity that we thought it was, that would be able to continue to go at the same rate it always has. And no matter how hard we work to pamper and please our body, it can give out at any turn, causing a lot of anger and confusion. And we all know that eventually, at some point, the body's going to shut down altogether, not just shutting down on the few levels that happens when we get the flu or when we get a sinus infection, and this will lead in our eventual death. And I mean, that's pretty unreliable if you think about it. So then the next cognitive distortion that the Buddha talked about is our tendency to perceive what is unsatisfactory as pleasurable. And I think most of the time we're running around in our bodies thinking it's really great to be alive and to be human beings, but we usually forget about the fragility of our bodies and how at any point something can go terribly wrong. And instead of being a source of endless pleasure, our bodies can become prisons of pain, in effect becoming our own worst enemies. Then the third distortion that the Buddha talked about is seeing what is impure as pure. And there's a tendency in our culture to idolize the body, to see it as a marvelous work of science or a work of art. But if we look on the inside of our bodies, they're actually quite disgusting. And I'm very thankful that Buddhism and all the Buddhist masters have reminding us that we're basically sacks of filth, producing filth all day long that needs to be cleared away. And I also think it's interesting to consider how we're always getting sick. Our bodies are always being infiltrated by germs that are trying to shut it down. It's just a matter of whether our immune systems are strong enough to fight off these germs. And so in a sense, we're always dying. We're always approaching death. And it's a matter of whether certain conditions are in place to counteract those conditions that would lead to our death. And I thought about doing a new meditation, just walking around thinking, I'm dying, and seeing where this would get me. Probably need to balance it with, I have a precious human life. But it's a very interesting thought. And then the fourth distortion that the Buddha talked about is the biggest problem. It's mistaking what doesn't have a self for having a self. And this, of course, mainly applies to ourselves, the me that we think that we are. And so being healthy and active in one moment, and then the same day becoming laid on my back in bed, really showed me that I'm not the person who I think I am. At least it's subject to change. And if we ever get really sick at some point and have to cut down on our duties, it'll become really clear that we're not who we have considered ourselves to be, and based on what we're capable of doing. So it's pretty hard to escape awareness of the body when you're sick and the different sensations that come up. So I thought it was a good opportunity to do some body meditations. I looked at the pain and tried to really see at its center what was going on and find that there was really not much there. It was just this moving massive sensations. I also took apart the parts of the body to see that I was not any of these parts and that there's not even an inherently existent body there to impute such a self upon. And then I also was thinking about how getting sick can bring up attachment to reputation. And at the Abbey, we all have many different roles that we play, and we call these the different hats that we wear to keep the Abbey running. And so we're all on different teams, like the infrastructure team, the cat care team, the guest care team, Dharma dissemination. And when I get really busy, I find that I start to relate to myself as just my hats. And I forget that I'm other things too, like a suffering sentient being under the influence of polluted karma and the inflictions. And then I also start to relate to other people as their hats too. And I forget that they're human beings with needs and interests besides unplugging stopped toilets or emptying recycling bins when they get full. When I used to work, I would get really worried when I was sick that that my responsibilities would fall through the cracks and that my boss would think of me as an unreliable employee and blame me or punish me in some sense. And it's a little bit better here at the Abbey because we all make it part of our practice to joyfully take on each other's duties when we fall sick. So I don't have to worry as much about resentment. However, I did see that I was concerned that people would start to think I was unreliable or lazy the longer I'd stayed in bed. And so when this happened, I said, oh, that's definitely attachment to reputation there. And I'm really thankful that I'm in a place where that became clear and we encourage each other to let that kind of thing go. And then I must admit that there is some pleasure in thinking that people will really be quite upset if I don't send them a wonderful thank you note within 24 hours of them sending us a gift, or that nobody else can write clearly on the schedule whiteboard if I don't do it, or nobody can check the water meter as diligently as I can. But this is actually not true at all. It's just attachment to reputation. I know that Venerable Pende for sure has much better handwriting than I do. And so it got me to see how I had this idea of myself of being some productive, vibrant nun that could really run circles around everybody else, but that is actually not true at all, because I know the seniors will keep running circles around me for many, many more years. And then being sick helps to practice contentment. So you have to be content with whatever food that they bring you and whenever they bring it. And you have to be content if somebody's running a chainsaw outside of your bedroom window and you're trying to take a nap. And then in a related way, I think one of the most uplifting practices to do while being sick is to recall the kindness of others. And when you're sick and you're relying on other people to take care of you, it becomes really obvious just how dependent you are on them for your survival. And I think it's easy to overlook this when we're full of energy running around on a daily basis thinking that we're totally in charge and completely independent. But when we get sick, once again, we're reminded of our limitations and how we really are dependent on others, just like when we were children or when we will be as elderly adults if we happen to live that long. So lying in my bed, I was looking at the walls and the roof and trying to generate gratitude for the construction workers who built those structures. Being thankful to the farmers who grew the food, the people who made my pajamas and my sheets that I was lying in, and also all the residents and supporters of the Abbey who keep it up and running 24 hours a day, almost 24 hours a day, but 365 days a week, days a year, nonstop. It's just fantastic. And so reflecting on all this kindness, I saw this flu as a great opportunity to reorient my motivation away from being caught up in getting my own personal desires and agendas met, and instead to generate more compassion for people and to try and repay the kindness that had kept me alive until this point. So I think that if we get sick, hopefully we'll be reminded that all other beings face this same situation, and that they'll also need taking care of just as much as we do. And so in that sense, we're all equal. We're all the same. We're all suffering in cyclic existence, and we're all face the same fate until we are able to generate the wisdom that will liberate us from samsara. So in this way, pain and sickness can be used to generate compassion, which is the chief thing that we need to become Buddhas. And because I was able to transform some of my discomfort and isolation into compassion, I felt that this was actually a really positive experience. And I was thankful for it. And I only hope that I can keep this attitude when I'm facing a more serious illness or when I'm facing death. That'll be the real test. So in the meantime, let's try to remember that we're all much closer to death than we'd probably like to acknowledge, and to use the precious time that we have left to transform our minds into wisdom, love, compassion, and to try to make the world a better place.